We're basically looking at what it means to be young and what exactly does it mean to be a young person living in this 21st century where everything is operating on gadgets, where phones are charging to 100% in 8 minutes. Yeah, we really want to understand today's youth. And the fact that each and every generation is different from the other. And I know I cannot verify this right now, especially without doing any studies or reading any article, but I am 100% sure that literally every generation that comes before always complains about the generation that comes after it. So whenever you're complaining about the generation that came after you, remember that there's a generation that complained when you were coming. I'm sure with baby boomers, I don't even know what generation comes before baby boomers, but I'm sure those who came before baby boomers were complaining that baby boomers are so, because baby boomers grew up in a time where, getting a job was like the easiest thing. Like you literally knew once you graduated, depending obviously on where you grew up. But here in South Africa, the most popular job positions were being a teacher, being a nurse, being a mostly everything within government. Working within government was the most popular job positions. As you know, working at some department of health, department of home affairs, department of this or that or this or that or labor. So, and also being a traffic cop and being a cop in itself, those were very, very and in fact, I remember my grandmother saying to me, I told her that I'm done with high school. And then she said to me, "Oh, so now you're going to train." And I didn't understand that language. Like it was actually a thing that people went back. Well, when people finished high school, they went on training, right? You didn't go, it wasn't considered studying, it was considered training because you are training for a job. Or let me rather say, it was actually popular for people to ask you, "Oh, so what are you going to train to be?" Because it was like you train, then after you train, you go get a job. Right? That's what was understood. However, now we're living in a completely different time where hundreds and thousands of South Africans, in fact, where we go up to the millions of young South Africans have qualifications. They've done they've done the quote unquote training, but they don't have jobs. They're unable to find jobs. So today we're specifically talking about millennials versus Gen Zs or the Gen Alpha. What are the key behavioral differences between the two generations? And this is a very interesting one to look at because we're living in a time where generations are very much well understood. Technology has so much information to give us about Gen Zs, especially because they've lived their entire lives surrounded by technology, by Google. They live on the internet. They meet each other on the internet. I mean, some of our millennial generations, we met our spouses on the internet. I'm not talking about Charl and I. We did it the old-fashioned way. But a lot of our friends met their partners on online, on Tinder, on Facebook, on Instagram, and they actually got married. Right now, I want us, Charles, to have a conversation about what we think. And of course, some of these things we're going to be having a conversation about. It's things that we observe personally. It's things that we're seeing within Gen Zs and the upcoming generation. And I know, Charles, one of the things that irritate you about Gen Zs is cancel culture. But I also want to challenge us to also look at some of the good things that Gen Zs bring to the table. Right now, we're living in a time, obviously, where and I think it's very interesting the differences between us and Gen Zs because we're literally living in that space right now. And we can make the observation right now as we're having this conversation. In times past, a lot of social scientists didn't care as much. Or they didn't have the instruments to actually monitor the behaviors of Gen Zs. And in fact, it's quite interesting now because you can actually have a look at a lot of countries within the world and actually start to see how millennials as well as Gen Zs are behaving in general. So, as a very brief understanding of what we're talking about, right? A millennial is anyone born between 1980 and 1995. So 1980 would be 40-year olds, right, Charles? Am I correct? Because I'm 30 and I'm 1990. Okay, 41. There we go. Yeah, and all the way up to 1995. And I'm guessing 1995 would be 30, 36. All right, yeah. The, 36, yeah. So those are the millennials. And then also you get your Gen Zs, which are born after 1995, right up to the early 2000s. So they're a bit younger than our group, our millennial group. And the reason that it's so important to look at the differences between these generations is because I don't know if you've noticed, but companies as well as our entertainment changes based on the relevant generation. A lot of our what our society consumes in terms of products, transport, in terms of the things we watch, the places we go, it'll all be transformed based on the relevant and current generation. So if we are not aware of what Gen Zs are up to, we will not see the change happen, and it'll shock us, right? And if we don't, as the elder generation, try to understand what's happening with Gen Zs, what will usually happen is that we will become so ignorant that we won't be even be able to help them navigate the world that they live in. So it's very important for us to have these conversations, right? For one, we know that millennials, one of the things that set us apart is the fact that millennials grew up with in a time when the internet was not as popular as it is now. For example, I know what 2G is. I literally have used a phone with 2G, and I remember how excited we were when 2G came into play. Nowadays, people know 4G, and 4G is so common and popular, which is LTE. So 4G is LTE, just a bit advanced, I suppose. But 4G and LTE are like, very good friends. And I literally lived through the time when we had the Nokia 3310. I remember what it was like when that was the most popular phone you could have. I remember when that phone didn't even go on the internet. I remember when the first few phones came to my neighborhood, not even to the world, but to my neighborhood. The first friend who showed me how the internet works, the first phone I owned that had the internet, and what I could do and what I couldn't do, and how slow it was, and yet I was still very excited. But nowadays, I mean, back then we didn't complain about 3G. There was a time when 3G came into play, and we didn't complain because 3G was like, whoa, you know? And there was a time when, I don't know if you know MiG 33. MiG 33 was what used to be popular before Mixit, like very globally. It was a chat app. And I remember the first person I saw using it was a friend of mine who came from Joburg. It basically had chat rooms just like Mixit, and you could chat to absolute strangers. And this is the interesting thing about back in the day, when we were discovering the internet, is that we our generation loved the idea of interacting with people we didn't know, right? Yeah, we literally had walked in a chat room with people we didn't know and chatted with them, strangers we would never meet. Sometimes people that were not even from your country or continent. And then obviously there were though. Then we moved over to Mixit. I remember for me it was Mixit. I remember Mixit. I even carried Mixit all the way up to varsity. Now, but anyways, so that is one defining factor of us millennials. We grew up, we literally saw the internet in its infantile stages, and we grew up with it. So we were introduced to the internet. And then you have Gen Zs who were born during the internet, right? When the internet was, by the time they were self aware, by the time they understood the world, they could, by the time you could spell your name, you could already use a tablet. You could already navigate your way around a computer. We didn't grow up in that generation. So Gen Zs are very, very different generation. They're a lot more vocal, but unfortunately, they're vocal on social media. They're very vocal on social media. They have very different interests than millennials. A lot. The thing about them is, you. I don't know if it's just me, and I'm going to mention this as just my experience, and I don't know if you can confirm or deny this, Charl. But I really think Gen Zs, some people call them Zoomers, Gen Zs are a lot more knowledgeable at a very young age. So sometimes when you have a conversation with them, they are already way ahead of you in what you're talking to them about. I mean, we have a colleague right now whose son knows who Elon Musk is and who knows what Elon Musk's companies are at the age of 12. Can you believe that? Baby boomers never got the chance to live their youth during the internet, whereas we got a chance to experience a bit of both. So before BE, which is before internet, and also AE, which is after internet. But unfortunately for Gen Zs, they are the natives of the internet world. They were born during Wi-Fi, Google, social media, TikTok, YouTube, TED Talks, all of these things where you literally can do an online course and become qualified in a particular in a particular field. But now going a little bit deeper, Charl, right? Going a little bit deeper. This also means that for us, I mean, obviously millennials and Gen Zs are all considered to be youths. So even if you're thinking to yourself, even at 36, yes, if you're 36, you're still part of youth. Well, I know that different definitions. Some at church they might put you under singles instead of youth. So I don't know. I don't know which definition you want to go with. But your youth actually lasts. I mean, if once you enter your 40s, maybe we can start debating that you're no longer under youth. The struggles that millennials faced are not the same struggles that Gen Zs face. They are not all that different, but for example, when I went to varsity, for example, I had many different struggles than what Gen Zs do. For example, when I went to varsity, I didn't have the option of studying online. Not that online platforms did not exist, but they were not as ubiquitous as they are today. So nowadays, literally, even Harvard is offering free education. Obama has his own online education platform. You can literally educate yourself from your smartphone. All you need is diligence and discipline. And you can literally become an expert at something. So when I was going to varsity, there was none of that. And I think also when I learned how to drive, which I think this was by choice though, because the internet already existed. But my point is this: when living in the time of the Gen Zs, depending on if you're a person who loves the internet or not, and I know that our conversation is revolving a lot around the internet, and that was not the intention. It's just that the internet really does help differentiate the two generations. But what I was going to say is, for me, when I was approaching my adulthood, when early adult life, right? There were a lot of things that I couldn't watch YouTube videos to understand. I literally had to discover them myself. There weren't as many tutoring classes that you could take for free on the internet. But for Gen Zs, that's different. If you don't understand how something works as a person living in the modern era and you're a Gen Z, it's because you're just not searching the internet, or because there are some people who are technologically challenged, or they just don't like the internet, or you're just one of those people, which there aren't that many, right? Especially nowadays, because I mean, 4 year olds are using tablet. What's your excuse? And I don't mean that in a disrespectful manner. I say it in jest. But it's true, though, the fact that 4 year olds are using tablets. So you can imagine that people who are technologically challenged will probably not exist anymore in the near future. Gen Zs are actually a lot more involved in politics than what we were at their age. they know and they have political as well as social discussions on these social media platforms. Now, if you're sitting there, ask, like, trust me, your kid might be very well versed because you know what's a thing, right? I've realized that fathers, especially fathers, but often mothers as well, tend to not want their kids to show that they know and understand something better than they do. And there was a time when that was true, when your kid, you actually knew more than your kid. Why? Because you read the newspaper and your kid didn't care about it. You watched the news and your kid didn't care about it. You watched talk shows and your kid didn't care about it. So you understood how the world works better than they did. Unfortunately, the time we live in now, I know more about how the world works better than my mother. And there are Gen Zs who understand how the world works better than I do. I mean, imagine there's a 12-year-old who lives in, I think the kid stays in Sosha or Mamilodi, one of the two. A kid staying in Sosha or Mamilodi, 12-year-old, knows who Elon Musk is, right? And knows what company he has. And I was asking his mom, like, do you know who Elon Musk is? She's like, no, I'd never even, I've never even imagined that there's such a person. So it is important to understand that, Jen, we living in a time where your child can actually know a whole lot more than you do. And you might argue with them and they get frustrated because they know why. They read the article. They had the conversation with people who know it better in on social media. So for example, on YouTube, you find that, like, for me, I follow a lot of tech savvy people on YouTube. I know that you do as well, Charl. You follow people who explain current events very well. Like something happens now, and then they're able to deliver and tell you and help you digest that thing. And then you watch a lot of commentary on global news. I mean, I could tell you that Norway is one of the countries in the world with the most electric vehicles. Something that you couldn't know back in the day. So my point basically is this is what Gen Zs are doing, and they're starting to do it at a much earlier age. They're following people on the internet who are feeding them information directly and helping them digest that information. So they know things that you would never know because you don't exist in their world. And they understand how certain technologies work and how to make life easier for themselves. But also want to come back to the emphasis that they actually are aware of what's happening, not only in the political climate of their country of birth, but also of the neighboring countries and some countries around the world. They can actually tell you who what's happening currently between the left and right in America. Like that's modern Gen Zs, right? Or the modern youth. They can tell you those things. And I know, do you find it scary, Charl, that that's the world we live in, where your kids will actually be telling you how the world works and not the other way around? And that's the thing about today's world. Like, you can find someone who, comes from a very impoverished background. They're young. They've not even been to varsity. They're probably at home. They're struggling to pay for their school. But when they speak, they're very eloquent, like very, very eloquent. And you'd be shocked. You'd think that they live as savvy of a lifestyle as you do, or you'd assume that they might be middle class, and they absolutely not. But they speak very well because that's the world that we live in now, where even eloquent speaking and good reading is just ubiquitous. Like, I remember when I was growing up, how proud my aunt was of the fact that I speak English. And I'm like, back then, it was a big deal for baby boomers for their kids to speak English and speak it well. Like you're breathing it out of your nostrils. It was a very, very big deal. But now for us millennials, speaking English is like the most normal thing. So for our kids to speak English is like, duh. You understand what I mean? They're going to be speaking better English than us, in fact. So you know what? Yeah, we're just going to wrap it up there right now. So that is our discussion on, the differences between millennials as well as Gen Zs. Very important differences. If you have anything to add to the conversation, please do let us know.